Shipbuilding, the new front in America's trade war against China. On October the 3rd, the United States released details of hiked payment guidelines for port fees on vessels linked to China, which are set to take effect next week. Now, this is the result of a so-called 301 investigation and report by the Office of the United States Trade Representative, or USTR, which accuses China of unreasonable targeting for dominance in the maritime, logistics and shipbuilding sectors. Now, the U.S. started to take a real hard look at China's shipbuilding industry and launched the investigation in April last year under the Biden administration. Now, the Trump administration is carrying forward this campaign, allegedly in an attempt to revitalize U.S. shipbuilding. What specifically will be charged on Chinese-made ships? Are these moves really about boosting U.S. competitiveness? What impact might these measures have on the global shipping industry and trade? Welcome to The Point with me, Liu Xin, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Beijing by Zhou Mi, Deputy Director of the Institute of American and Oceania Study at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. From Brisbane, Australia, by Professor Warwick Powell, Adjunct Professor of Queensland University of Technology, and here in the studio by Ina Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Centre for International Governance Innovation, a Canadian think tank and Chairman of Asian Narratives. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. First of all, as we always do, let's take a brief look back at the timeline of what has happened on this issue. Now, in April 2024, last year, the USTR launched the Section 301 investigation into China's maritime, logistics and shipbuilding sectors. In January this year, days before President Trump came into office again, the USTR released the investigation report accusing China of quote-unquote unreasonable targeting for dominance in these industries. Then, in April this year, USTR announced vessel fee actions and proposed additional trade measures targeting China. In June this year, USTR issued a notice of proposed modification of action seeking public comment on adjusting fee calculations and targeting specific vessels. Now, in September, just last month, China updated its regulations on international maritime transport, reserving the right to counter any discriminatory measures. And in October this year, U.S. Customs and Border Protection Authority published the Section 301 vessel fees notice detailing implementation procedures. So, Professor Warwick, let me go to you in Australia. From your standpoint, what's the story here? What we're seeing?
Well, it's good to be with you again, Lucy, and I think that this is in large part American political theatre. The American shipbuilding industry has been in large part non-existent now for many decades. It occupies about 0.1% of global shipbuilding market share. So none of these moves is genuinely about the American shipbuilding industry. The idea that the United States is complaining about some other country seeking to dominate anything is in and of itself a laughable proposition. The United States has been the past master of dominating everything that it can lay its hands on, and this smacks of desperation. This is not helpful to the American national economy, certainly doesn't help America as a trading nation to the extent that it is, and it sends a signal, I think, to the global marketplace and communities around the world that the United States doesn't seek win-win outcomes, but instead seeks to implement Tonya Harding, beggar thy neighbour, hurt your competitor kind of strategies.
Ina, the Biden administration started the probe, as I mentioned, and the Trump's team later advanced it with enforcement actions. How does the Trump approach compare with that of President Biden?
Tweedledee and Tweedledum, as they say. I mean, there's really no difference. What they're doing is both pushing this idea of American exceptionalism, that the U.S. can impose whatever they want in order to get what they think they deserve, which is hegemony over commerce, politics, and also military. So it's, yeah, I agree with Warwick. This is political theater. It has no real effect. I mean, my family was involved in building 28 submarines. We built ships in the Great Lakes. The industry went down. Why? Because the U.S. chose to have a strong dollar. A strong dollar, shipping is all about money. And with that, they were not able to compete. They went into other businesses. But shipbuilding has been dead effectively for, 40, 50 years. But you'll note that when this was announced, it was announced in Pittsburgh, which used to be a shipbuilding area, definitely one of the rust bucket areas. And this is just political theater. He's trying to say, oh, I'm standing up for America. But where are the shipyards? They can barely, get the number of submarines that they want. They're supposed to do 2.3 submarines a year, and they're around 1.6 to 1.8. This idea that American shipbuilding is poised to answer the challenge is nonsense. In the last year, they got 2 U.S. claims. They got 2 gas movers, LNG tankers. But the fact is, they're going to be made in the Philippines. So where are the jobs going? Not to Pittsburgh. So this is political theater, pure and simple.
Let's take a closer look at the measures that have been announced by the United States. And Professor Zhou, I would like to have your input there. How do you look at them? But here are the details. So there are 3 fee categories. First of all, in Annex 1, it stipulates a $50 per net ton for vessels owned or operated by Chinese entities. And the sum, please note, is expected to go up by about $30 each year till the year 2028. In Annex 2, for Chinese-built vessels, operators will pay the higher of $80 per net ton or $120 per container discharged. And then there is also Annex 3, which applies to all non-US built vehicle carriers, regardless of ownership, at a rate of $40 per net ton. So, Professor Zhou, help us understand exactly what these fees are and what they mean.
Well, in my understanding that they are just trying to put the fees, subjectively. So according to there are 3 categories. The first one is something to do with Chinese operators. So you're trying to exclude the Chinese operations in these areas, like to have the import and export to United States. I think it's a kind of a very targeted measurement. And the second is something to do with Chinese manufacturing of the shipbuilding. Right. So for the other operators in the world, they are not able to find as affordable as previous, like for the fees. They increase the expenses allowed. And for the third one is something to do with a very specific sector, especially for the autos. So I mean that is a kind of a very different strategies. I think that the governors and also USTR are trying to discriminate the market and trying to exclude the factors of Chinese shipbuildings or operators.
Warwick, help us understand these numbers. Exactly how do these fees work, and help us put these numbers into perspective. $50, for instance, per net ton for vessels owned and operated by Chinese entities. How much of a cost will that add to vessels owned and operated by Chinese companies? And how big of a disadvantage are these operators put in, given this situation?
Look, yeah, it's quite different.
Sorry, Professor Zhou, this is for Warwick.
Oh, sorry.
I think perhaps Professor Zhou would be able to deliver a little bit more wisdom, but I'll give it a go. The total cost, of course, of landed goods takes into account shipping costs as well as the cost of the products on board. And part of the challenge from an American point of view, if it seeks to shift the economics of trade, is that it can't just tackle the question of the cost of shipping, but it also needs to tackle the question of the cost of goods, which it's trying to do through tariffs. The bottom line, however, is that these additional costs will ultimately be passed on to the importers. And in time, the importers will pass those costs on to the end buyer, whether they are enterprises or households. So, whichever way you look at this, the cost impact will ultimately be borne by those who are importing or using imported products in the United States. The other point to remember is that shipbuilding is a sector in which China is now delivering over 50% of global market share. A large proportion of global transport ships for goods are made in China and are operated under Chinese flags. This discriminatory initiative will actually lead to further cost increases generally in America without necessarily shifting the ability for people to use ships made by others. There simply aren't other ships, or actually regenerating a shipbuilding industry in the United States. That is just not going to happen for a whole bunch of long-term reasons. The United States began undermining its shipbuilding industry actually in the 1920s with the introduction of the Jones Act, which created a protected market but undermined the shipbuilding industry's incentives to pursue innovation and efficiencies. And the legacy of that episode of protectionism carries all the way through a century on to a point where American shipbuilding today is simply not in the ballpark.
Well, since we're talking about shipbuilding industry and the decline of the United States in that sector, let's talk about the rapid rise of China in this sector over the past few decades. And in 2021, I actually visited the then world's largest LNG-powered container ship that was built in China by China and commissioned by the French company CMA CGM. It was really fascinating. Ina, let me go to you. How do you see, and again, as Warwick pointed out, China right now is the world's leader for 15 consecutive years in terms of shipping, and there are three main indicators: completion, new orders, and order backlog. China is leading in all of these. So what propelled China in these sectors?
Cost and efficiency. There used to be that it was lopsided. You had Japan and South Korea that were dominating in these areas. But over time, Chinese shipyards, because they have a lower cost of labor, they're much more efficient.
Well, some Americans argue it's artificially lowered cost of labor.
That's nonsense. These companies are involved in cutthroat competition, which offers lower prices to people who are coming in to buy. I've talked to ship owners and ship brokers extensively. I've lectured to them. I can tell you that it is an incredibly competitive industry. And Chinese companies, like in many other areas, they excel at competition.
Mr. Zhou, what is your observation of the reasons behind China's rapid rise in the shipbuilding industry right now? Every year, over 50% of global ships produced around the world are from China.
Yeah, I think that there may be three factors. The first one is that, we have a very huge market. China is the #1 country in the international trade. So we have so many cargoes. We have to deal with cargoes by affordable and also very incountable kind of the ships. So I think that is the first reason. And second is I understand that Chinese enterprises, especially the private sectors, they're really good at doing the things collectively. So they are building the ships depending on the steel and ironing industries, and also a lot of collaboration in different regions, like including the engines. And I think that is a systematical way of doing businesses. Shipbuilding is a very long time of building. It's a kind of not very easy way. So we have to have a very strong basis for the manufacturing. And the third one is that Chinese companies are really innovative. They are doing a lot of innovations based on different fields and also trying to meet the demand from different markets accordingly. So I mean, all these three factors are, what we can find that China has accumulated several sectors in different cities, like in Guangzhou and also in Jiangsu and in Shanghai. So they are really competing with each other. That is the reason we we see they are more influential in the global market.
However, in January this year, as I mentioned, the USTR issued findings in its 301 investigation report accusing China's quote-unquote targeted dominance in the maritime, logistics and shipbuilding sectors of being unreasonable, which hurts or which burdens or restricts U.S. commerce and is therefore actionable. Warwick, how do you find these U.S. claims as a result of the so-called investigation? Are they grounded in facts?
Well, as China's position in the global shipbuilding industry has grown over the last 20 to 30 years, trade with the United States has grown commensurately. So you'd hardly say that the growth of China's capacity in shipbuilding has undermined America's ability to participate in global trade. In fact, quite the reverse. The expansion of trade, of which China has been a key component, has been enabled by the ability of Chinese industry to create the tools necessary to enable trade to actually happen. Some of America's most successful enterprises these days in the electronic commerce space and also in retailing are heavily integrated into Chinese supply chains, and the products don't come on aeroplanes. These products, whether they are smartphones, consumer electronics, and the myriad of things that are sold to Americans via platforms such as eBay, are all delivered into the American market on ships. So the idea that China's shipbuilding capability has hampered America's ability to participate in trade and commerce is laughable. The evidence actually supports the reverse argument. Without these ships, America's ability to improve its living standards by accessing low-cost, high-quality supply chains from across the oceans simply would not have been there.
So right now, what I'm seeing, for instance, Aina, the U.S. is accusing China of non-market practices, and hence, China needs to be punished, or this kind of sanction needs to be put on China. But then the United States is imposing these protectionist and non-market measures onto China itself. How do you explain that? Are they legitimate in saying, because I think you're not operating on market rules, so I am doing this to you?
Yeah, it's nonsense. This Warwick and I both, pounced on this side that this is political theater, and that's exactly what it is. It's just red meat for the MAGA base. The fact is that the United States is concerned that China is rising, and one of the areas that it has been attacking, not only here in terms of maritime trade, is the logistics chain. They realize that China has shown in this area, it's actually been to the U.S. benefit because a more efficient logistics chains means that the cost of goods that arrive in the United States are less. Well, the U.S. is saying, no, we don't want that. We don't care about higher prices. What we care about is we want to undermine China. Now, this is not only true, as I said, in the maritime area, but if you look at what moves the U.S. has been making in the stance to try to interrupt and interfere with Chinese Belt and Road initiatives, saying that in Balochistan, in Pakistan, they're going to put a $500 million investment in energy in a highly unstable area where China's CPEC, this is the main road that they've set up to this port, is going to be. This is obviously just trying to spoil things for China. And all of this nonsense about, we've considered this and that, this is just political theater, dressing to justify what cannot be justified otherwise.
Well, let's take a look at China's reactions. China has repeatedly, as I said earlier, issued statements either by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Commerce Ministry to strongly object to the U.S. proposed action. But on the day when the U.S. announced the implementation procedures, actually China didn't come up with a very strong statement. However, days before that, the State Council issued a decree numbered 817. That's on 29th of September, basically 4 days before the U.S. published the details on October the 3rd. China issued this decree revising its maritime transport regulations, which goes into effect immediately. And according to Xinhua report, China says it will take necessary countermeasures against countries or regions that impose or support discriminatory bans, restrictions, or similar measures targeting Chinese operators, vessels, or crew engaged in international maritime transport or related services, and that such measures will be enacted unless relevant treaties or agreements offer adequate and effective remedies, according to the decree. Mr. Zhou, how do you look at the timing of this piece of legislation or amendment, and what message is China sending here?
Well, I think that it's true that Chinese government really take care about the enterprises, especially for the industry from the private sectors. So we want to create a stable and sustainable environment for them. So I think this decree is kind of a very important message that we want to have a important legal basis for the actions possible in the future. So we are not just trying to let everything just violating that's the promises and also the international routines. We are trying to protect the enterprises of China. If they are put in some improper or unfair position, we will try to correct that. That is the message. And also, we have a lot of messages. We are not just trying to discriminate any operators. Maybe they are coming from United States, but I don't think that enterprises are the similar as the government. So we have to separate these two entities, and we are trying to do a lot of investigation and also based on the facts to decide what we are going to do. So that gives us some possibilities and the policy tools for the possible actions to the United States side.
Well, how do you look at the wording of this amendment? It says, China will take necessary countermeasures against countries or regions that impose these discriminatory bans or similar measures targeting Chinese operators, vessels, and crew. Does that mean that China will go tit for tat against what the U.S. does to Chinese vessels or China-related crews?
Look, China has a long history of tempering its responses to American provocations and attempts to stymie China's economic development through a broad range of sanctions and tariffs and various measures such as those. And I mean by that, that the Chinese government leaves itself a lot of room to ultimately develop its responses in ways that also provide plenty of opportunities for negotiated off-ramps. So rather than approaching questions on an impetuous tit-for-tat basis, the message that is being sent is that China will protect its enterprises when they are being treated unfairly and when they are being singled out, as the American moves clearly do, because no other ships from any other countries or made in any other countries are being identified for these measures. China is signaling that it will take care of its own, number one, but it's also reinforcing a very clear message that China has been making for many years now, and that is that it is a stable, responsible player on the international stage where it will take measured responses in a way that sends the right signals without necessarily destroying the prospects of a return to more normal relationships. So it's the responsible thing to do. But it is making it very clear to the Americans that China will not be pushed around any longer.
Aina, what is the impact that you foresee on American-owned carriers? Some are fearing that this is going to unintentionally destroy American-owned carriers. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, the Americans have been buying Chinese ships, so this idea that they're somehow immune is nonsense. I mean, this is just more Donald Trump. As I said, he's throwing red meat to his base. He's not really thought through anything. I mean, if you look at his health plan that was supposed to be implemented how many years ago, he still is at the stage where he has a framework of ideas. This is exactly the same type of thing. He is just looking for optics. There's no reality to this. And I want to add to what Warwick said in the sense that China is preparing a legal defense. They are complying with international laws. They're the ones who are going to the WTO. And this is the response that they have. The U.S. is using fig leaves of whatever it can put together, 301 investigations, whatever, to just basically do what it wants. And this is being seen by the international, by the world, and they quite clearly see a rule of law versus a rule of the law that other country, that Washington makes.
Yeah, well, the optics aside, in essence, again, Ina, I stay with you. Do you think this is going to revitalize the U.S. shipbuilding industry or cripple China's shipbuilding sector?
It's not going to revitalize the U.S. Shipbuilding sector, as was pointed out by Work. There are so many parts to this, and a lot of it has to do with labor. No one is rushing to open up or build a new shipyard.
So how about China?
Work. And China, no, I mean, China has the ability, it has the markets, it is the destination now. So all you're doing is raising the prices. Because, for instance, if the Chinese ship would have to pay more, guess what? The non-Chinese ship is going to charge more. So it's not like there's any kind of savings. And this all gets passed down to consumers who are already under tremendous pressure by all the other tariffs. So this is just a regressive tax on Americans, and it hasn't been thought through as usual, and it's going to rebound. And it has no positive effect for America.
Mr. Zhou, what is your take on the possible crippling effect on Chinese shipbuilding industry? Is this going to happen?
I don't think that will happen naturally because, the trade is still there, so they still have a lot of demand. So based on the price or affordabilities, China's shipbuildings are very competitive. But I want to mention another point that, nowadays China's shipbuilding industry is not just like decades ago when US and South Korea and Japan has. So we are doing something innovatively. They are making the ships in a very different ways. Like we are seeing that new energy vehicles, they have to be taken care of by the ships. So there are so many innovation, and we are using the better fuels to fulfill our promises for the climate change. There are so many competitiveness, and they cannot be, taken by other competitors in the world right now.
Well, already operators are relocating from Hong Kong, for instance, to places such as Singapore in preparation, in anticipation of this move. Do you think this is going to pick up? How big of a disruption is it going to have on global shipping and trade?
Look, quite clearly global shipping will make some adjustments to minimise the impact of these measures on the operators themselves. But unsurprisingly, enterprises, when confronted with the need to make changes, such as where they're registered, will be able to do so relatively efficiently. We've seen that in the aftermath of sanctions on Russian oil, for example, where a whole fleet of vessels have managed to adjust to new operating environments and continue trade. The other point to remember very quickly is that global trade continues to grow, notwithstanding trade with the US declining, which actually points to a need for more shipping capacity. China is the world's largest trading partner for around 3/4 of nations in the world, and China's trade with Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East and North Africa and South America continues to grow.
Yeah.
It will not cripple China's industry one bit, but it will damage America.
Well, literally, America is putting a wall around itself by trying to wall in China, isn't it? Anyway, we keep a close watch on the situation. Many thanks to my three guests, Zhou Mi, Warwick, and Ina Tang. And thank you for your insights. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, coming to you from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Li Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.